you again for coming. I'm so delighted to have you. As I said in my first question to you when we sent the initial draft over, I read your bio and I was like, okay, instant fan. You're such a Galatinian. And I'm fairly new to NYU, but I really connected with all the Galatinians. I
Because we're the kooky fun ones.
Right,
We're
exactly. I'm
kooky
kooky
fun.
and fun. So it was like you were my people. I
Love
got
at first
that.
sight.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'd love to, and your career has really proven that sort of the truth of that interdisciplinary Gallatin method. So can we first talk about what drew you from Texas to Gallatin and what you studied while you were there?
Sure. So when I was at Gallatin, they have concentrations, not majors. They're very, very proud of that. And I'm very proud to say that my concentrations were political science and theater. And my colloquium had it with, excuse me. So let me start over. So they're very proud of concentrations. My concentrations at Gallatin were political science, theater with a minor in Africana studies. And my colloquium to graduate, because that's a very important part of the Gallatin experience,
Right.
was actually titled The Political Role of Theater and Film with an Emphasis on How It Impacts How We View Race in America,
Yeah, cool.
which is, and I'm actually, because I am a bit of a nerd, and I say that with pride.
As
Uh,
you should.
Thank you. I am still in touch with Professor Dinwiddie and some of the other wonderful
Right.
people who
Yeah.
taught me at Gallatin. But the irony is, all of what I do in my career really does tie all of those things together.
Mhm.
So I believe my Gallatin experience and my Gallatin colloquium served me quite well.
Right. It's interesting. I think we live in an increasingly interdisciplinary world. So I think that Gallatin thinking was sort of ahead of the curve, honestly. Um,
I call Gallatin Montessori for grown-ups.
yeah.
I went to Montessori school as a kid, and you're building blocks on one day, you're reading books on another day. And that really was my Gallatin experience. And it's interesting that you said that that's becoming more common, the interdisciplinary approach, or being a multi-platform, multi-hyphenate. But I remember when I actually got my first TV staffing job in LA, and you start taking meetings with different agents and different managers about possibly repping you, because I actually didn't have a manager or an agent to get my first job, a story I'll share later. But one of them said, looking at your bio, you seem like an interesting and talented person, but you're clearly very unfocused. You really need to focus on one thing and focus on doing that well, and cut loose this other stuff. Needless to say, that person is not my rep. And I think that I've proven them wrong, that you can do lots of different things if you're really committed to them and committed to trying to do them well.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. It's certainly been in my experience in my career as well. And I also think that you can't afford to just have one card trick anymore. Honestly, it's rough out there. Transmedia is the thing. You have to be able to I think, talk about, be platform agnostic and talk about just how's the best way to tell a story, right? I think this is what's really being required of all of us. And I think as content increases its emphasis on changing the needle in terms of social change, which I think is ever more important, I think that becomes, even more true.
Well, one of my quotes to live by, Marie Wilson, who is a very prominent feminist activist, helped create Take Your Daughter to Work Day. And Marie is a mentor of mine. And one of her favorite quotes, which I believe comes courtesy of the indigenous chief Wilma Mankiller, is, "You don't meet people where you are, you meet people where they are." And that's actually why I love working in so many different formats, because the people who are, reading my work in the Daily Beast or the Guardian are not the same people who are seeing my work on Being Mary Jane or Black Lightning.
Mhm.
And it's been fascinating, the different types of letters I get from people depending on where they sort of find my writing.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons I love the idea of continuing to work in different formats, because you need to meet people where they are, and people are in different places.
Yeah, I think that's very well observed. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of your path right after school. I mean, you've worked in theater and film and TV. So, can you talk a little bit about what that trajectory was like, and how did you get your start in all of those things?
Oh gosh. So I'm trying to give you the Reader's Digest version. So I mentioned that I did political science and theater. And what was interesting is I was genuinely interested in both the arts and entertainment and also politics, because that's something that my father was very passionate about. And so I was raised with a very strong sense of social justice, social change, and being part of the world's solutions, instead of just sitting back and criticizing the problems. So I remember I saw the movie The American President, and there was a bit where I thought, okay, I think I want to be Michael J. Fox and be a speechwriter for the president. I think that's what I want to try. And then I also loved acting. I was a very proud drama nerd in high school. I say that with total pride and affection. And so that's why I wanted to study both. And I remember I asked my mom, well, how do I pick a career? And she said, I think it'll be kind of chosen for you. You just do what you do and work hard, and it'll kind of reveal itself. And that actually ended up happening. And so I am told this never happens to anybody, but it happened to me. I graduated from Gallatin and I went to the career services office at NYU. I slotted my resume into the different slots for the things I was interested in, which was arts and entertainment and also politics. And I actually got a call from a congressional office and made it through the interviews, and they hired me. So I became, the lowest of the low congressional aides, district office in New York. And so I was on the political track, and a couple things happened. The first thing is, a quote someone once gave me in a job was, if you don't want your boss's job, rethink your career, right? Because if you're sitting somewhere and you're not going, oh my gosh, this is where I'm meant to be, and I want to have his job or her job, then maybe you're not in the right place. And once I started actually working on different campaigns and working for elected officials, I looked around and I thought, I don't think that I actually do want to be someone who's on campaigns in my 40s and 50s. I don't actually think that's the dream and path I see for myself. And around the same time, something interesting was happening, which is a number of African Americans in my age cohort that I was friendly with were telling me that they weren't Democrats, they were registered independents. I'm, African American, and I'm from Texas, and I frankly never met Black Republicans or independents. I'd only known Democrats. Ironically, once I moved to the East Village of New York, I realized that being raised a Democrat in Texas essentially made me like a Republican in New York, but that's a different conversation. And I would say that it's helped shape my politics, because I would kind of call myself someone who's a little bit suspicious of everybody, right? Which has helped with my writing covering politics, I would say. But I know we'll get to that in a second. But the point I'm making is I was meeting all of these registered independents who were African Americans. And at the time, I'd been working in politics. And I felt, well, this could actually really shake things up, right? If you have people who are not like my parents' generation, who have so loyally kind of carried the Democratic Party, there's a story there. And that's a story that should be told. And so one of my closest friends, who's still one of my closest friends to this day, and he also went to NYU, my best friend, David, he literally had a birthday party, and he worked in entertainment, entry level, but he worked in entertainment as an assistant. And he said to me, listen, I'm having this party. And when I walked into the party, he said, I'm sitting you next to Dan. He's a literary agent. You should tell him about your book. And I went, what book are we talking about? Not familiar with this book. And he said, well, Keli, you've been talking nonstop about, because I do talk a lot, as people can tell, you've been talking nonstop about this trend happening in African-American politics. So you should tell him. I mean, you've said someone should write about this. I said, someone, I'm not a writer. And he said, well, he's a great guy. Just tell him. So I sit next to him at this dinner, and I was thinking, oh, I don't want to be one of those people in New York who, corner someone at a party, because I'm sure that happens to you, and it's happened to me, right? Once you're in the industry, everyone has an idea, right? I have a script for you. So I didn't want to be that person, but he and I had been chatting for about 30 minutes or so. And finally I said, Dan, I got to confess, David had an ulterior motive seating us next to one another. He thought you might be interested in my book idea. And I saw his eyes kind of do the thing where you're polite, but you're like, oh gosh,
here we go.
Like, well, what's the idea, Keli? So I start doing what I'm doing here, which is going a million miles a minute and talking about these trends and the people I'd met and my experience in politics and how I did feel that certain older Democrats were a bit out of touch with what was happening with younger voters of color. And he's letting me go on, and I see him trying to get a word in, and I'm like, one more thing, just one more thing. And finally, Dan looks at me and says, Keli, I only handle fiction and not. So this poor man I had cornered. And then he looks at me and he says, well, who have you sent your proposal to? And I said, what do you mean? What's a proposal? And he goes, okay, well, how many chapters have you written? I said, well, it's more like up here. And he said, well, there's a book called How to Write a Book Proposal. I encourage you to purchase it. It'll help you get started. Good luck.
Yeah.
I turned around and started talking to someone else. And I felt like the world's biggest loser. And, like a John Hughes movie where you want to crawl under the table in the cafeteria in high school. And a couple weeks went by and I got a package in the mail and I opened it and it was the book, How to Write a Book Proposal.
Oh.
He wrote me a note and said, dear Keli, I hope this helps you get started. And so this is where a bit of the Texas comes in. I sent him cookies to thank him, and I said, look, if you can make the effort to send me this lovely, encouraging book, I'm going to make an effort give the old college try of writing a book proposal. And a couple days went by and I got an email that said, dear Keli, thank you for the cookies, see below. And he had forwarded an email to his colleague who handled nonfiction political books and said, I met this woman at a party. This is what she said. I know nothing about the topic, passing it on. And I wrote a reply and he said, talk to her yourself. She's great. And I started an email exchange that went back and forth. And that woman's name was Michelle Rubin. She was an agent at Writers House and she represented the Martin Luther King literary estate and a bunch of other major civil rights and political books. And I went to meet with her and it was one of those like in a movie in terms of when you find a creative soulmate. Michelle and I hit it off. We talked for 3 hours. And at the end of the conversation, I said, well, what happens next? She said, go home and start writing. And she represented me. And I followed How to Write a Book Proposal, the book. And I finished my proposal. She sent it out Thanksgiving, I remember, because it was the holiday season. And I was leaving to go see my grandparents who lived in rural Oklahoma, so in the middle of nowhere, my cell phone didn't even work. And as I was leaving for the airport, she called and said, we have an offer on the book. I told them you're going on vacation and you're unreachable, but have a great holiday. And part of why we had an offer on the book is because someone by the name of Barack Obama had decided to run for president. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, my little tiny book about the changing attitudes of African-American younger voters all of a sudden seemed a little bit more relevant. Mm-hmm. And then the book came out the week he won Iowa. That is how I became a writer. So
I think the moral of that story is always send cookies.
Yes.
Right? If I'm going to distill it down, it's just always send cookies. I think I've learned something here.
Well, and always say thank you, right? Because that's the truth.
I'm joking, of course, but yes.
No. But yes. You, in all seriousness, I actually do think that's the most important part of this.
Oh, I do too. I was making a joke, but I do. I think being, when someone extends themselves like that towards you, or even in a lesser way, it's just very important to be grateful and thankful and pay it forward as well.
And you've had a very successful career as a producer. And I have to tell you, now that I'm on the other side, I'm always shocked when you do things for people that you don't have to try to help them in the industry and never hear from them again. And not only do you sometimes never hear a thank you, they didn't even follow through, right?
Oh, that drives me insane, frankly.
Right? They say, can you introduce me to this person? I've been trying. And you say, okay, well, I'm going to do the intro. And then you find out they never followed up. And you're thinking, what? And so I always
didn't let you know what happened, which is another offense, right?
And I, in all seriousness, I feel like for the people who are listening, so many people think it's just about the talent and they go, I don't understand. I wrote a great script. I wrote a great book. Why am I not getting where I want to? And I always encourage people to really think about how they treat other people, because, talent will only get you so far. At a certain point, it's, who's a kind person? Who do I like working with?
And I think culture is changing somewhat. I mean, I think there used to be a culture in Hollywood that allowed for the, cigar chomping, ashtray throwing jerk. And the people that I work with, I eschew them, and, I hope everyone else does too. I just don't think that we can tolerate that culture anymore. It comes from a lot of, racist, misogynist, patriarchal thinking that has to be upended anyway. So we might as well just throw out this bad behavior along with the rest of it.
It's bad, it's toxic, and it also doesn't result in better art. I
I
know a lot
totally
of
agree.
really talented, nice people. And
Right.
so this myth of the evil, mean genius who throws things is totally absurd.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think, and there are plenty of talented people who want to be collaborative and smart and kind and sparky and friendly and not waste your time with all the drama, which none of us need. We have enough drama. We don't need any
Totally.
more, right?
Totally.
But speaking of drama, look at that segue I found. I'm so proud of myself.
Fabulous.
You have a play opening that opened this week, The Glorious World of Crowns, Kinks, and Curls, directed by Bianca Laverne Jones at the Center Stage Theater in Baltimore. And, I read through the synopsis and it really made me, I'm going to go see it now virtually. I'm going to buy a ticket.
Oh, thank you.
But the play looks at many aspects of race and culture through the lens of women and their uneasy relationship with their bodies and even more specifically their hair. And I was quite moved even just reading through the synopsis, honestly, because I do feel that every woman I know is in an uneasy relationship with herself and her hair.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have you walk us through, if you could, the play's inception and its evolution to the stage.
Yeah, so I mentioned being a drama nerd in high school, which I'm very proud of. I was even in the Texas Thespian Society. So I love doing plays and stuff in high school. So um, this is such a dream come true. I'm doing all sorts of other fun things in my career, but this really does feel like a dream come true. And because there's something about theater and the communal experience, even when it's online, the emails I've been getting from people about the play have been really moving. But the genesis is, as you pointed out, I've had about 9 lives in my career. And the book really launched me as a journalist. The book came out the week that President Obama won the Iowa caucus, and I was on cable news a lot, even though really my career was writing, right? I was a journalist, but everyone knows there's the kind of cable news industrial complex. So I
Yeah.
was on Fox News and
A
MSNBC.
whole other hour of that conversation, right? That's a whole other thing. Yeah.
Whole other thing. And what I think I wasn't prepared for is how much of my writing career would revolve around my appearance. And so, just to put this in context about kind of who I am outside of that career, I had to be taught how to do my own makeup once I started appearing on cable news, because I was not someone who wore makeup regularly. So it was to go from being like, great, I just write articles, right? To, okay, what's going on with your hair? What's going on with your makeup today? We can't put you on air looking like that. And so much of my life became about that. And there was a real turning point for me where I had my broadcast TV agent called and said the call that every person who's, waiting to be discovered and become a star waits for, which is one of the most powerful people in the news business just called us. They've been following your career and they want to meet. And I did the whole happy dance that you do, which is like, this is the moment you've been waiting for. And then she says, great, he had a cancellation tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. He'll see you in his office there. What my broadcast agent did not know is I had taken out my hair extensions and not told her. Which, for people who don't understand, if you're an actor or an on-air personality, you're not supposed to significantly change your appearance without discussing that with your representatives. And the reason I didn't discuss it is because I wasn't expecting to have the most important meeting of my career. I was going to be off air for a few days, so it was supposed to be fine. So it turned into this sort of comedy of errors because I was trying to figure out how does one, right? He's expecting a certain image of myself that he just saw on television probably 48 hours ago. And that's not what I'm going to look like in walking into his office. So, it was sort of a turning point because the meeting went fine. And he asked me questions about my career. He wasn't like, oh my God, which is what had happened in my head. But I'd spent so much mental energy preparing for this meeting where I should have been focused on what's going on in the news, what's happening in politics, thinking about, oh my God, my hair. And I knew I didn't want to live that way. And that was a turning point because I started slowly kind of easing out where I slowly stopped wearing the extensions on air. People would say things about it, even viewers. And I just didn't want to be beholden to that. And then what happened, which is connected to the previous question you asked me, is I was already becoming a bit disillusioned with what I call the Twitterification of news. I never wanted my tombstone to read, she fought a lot with people on Twitter. She fought a lot with people on cable news. I felt that perhaps there was a bigger purpose and there was more to life than that. And even my most amazing editors, you would hear them say things like, well, can't you, let's get a little something going, right? And you're thinking, but that's not, I just want to tell stories. So I'd gone to the public theater, and I'm connecting this back to the play. I'd gone to the public theater to see a fabulous play called The Good Negro, which was written by the amazing Tracy Scott Wilson, who's writing the new Aretha Franklin film, become very famous in her own right, wrote for the Americans. And the play was life-changing because it was basically telling a fictionalized version of the struggles of what it was like to be a Martin Luther King type character. And I fell in love with the play. And after I seen that play with my mother when she was visiting New York that week, I said, that's the kind of writing I want to be able to do, to tell stories in a nuanced way where you can have empathy for people you don't agree with and not just pounce on Twitter. So I secretly applied for the Public Theater's Emerging Writers Group Fellowship. I didn't even tell my family. One of the editors who was my reference, I said, I need you to be a reference. And if I don't get it, we are never discussing that this happened. You were to pretend I never asked you for this. And couldn't believe it when I was one of the 10 picked, and it changed my life because I rediscovered my love of writing. And I realized that the path forward for me was really to try to raise complicated, nuanced issues, but in a format with fictional characters where you could really have some of the conversations you can't have in the news.
Mhm.
And once I got the fellowship, about 18 months into it, believe it or not, I got a phone call from Mara Braca Keel, who is one of the most successful African-American female showrunners in history, a mentor of mine. And I only knew her socially. She liked having journalists do pop-ups on Being Mary Jane. So I had a 15-second and you'll miss it cameo. And Mara called and said, look, we've been fans of your work and we'd love to try to see if we can convince you to join us here in LA. But the catch is you'd have to move in like 2 weeks. And that was like my first staff writing job. And so I see it as all connected, right? That I was becoming sort of disillusioned with where media was headed. I was really becoming disillusioned with the idea that to tell stories, I had to worry about what I looked like all the time.
Mhm.
And so Mara really gave me this extraordinary lifeline that I got to go work on a TV show writing scripts about an African-American female cable news journalist.
Right.
And I got to start writing plays. And so now here we are, 6 years later? And the genesis of this play about the stories of Black women and what we endure in the workplace and in our personal lives when it comes to our hair all started from that whole experience of me on cable news. So I have no regrets about that.
Mhm.
But gosh, I'm so happy that the only times I have to put makeup on are when I do conversations like this. Like, only time.
You could have come makeup free. We're casual here. We don't like to put any pressure on, but
Okay.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that pop culture is a really strong way of influencing the narrative. It's something that I try to do in my own writing. And I wonder, are there particular instances that you can point to besides The Good Negro? Are there other instances that you can point to? Are there other media that you feel have changed the dialogue or have pushed the conversation in one direction or another?
Sure. I mean, I was so proud of working on Black Lightning, which I found out was one of the late, great John Lewis's favorite shows, which I've always said since learning that, even if I win an Oscar, I don't think I'll be able to make my mother prouder than her knowing that John Lewis actually watched something that I wrote for her. But I will tell you that Black Panther, I mean, the day that a group of African-American friends and I went to see Black Panther, we came out of the theater and we went to grab coffee to talk about the film. And there was a little boy who was white who was wearing a Black Panther costume. And I thought, okay, this is changing culture.
That's cool. Yeah.
There's so things like that. Obviously, I realize his legacy is extremely complicated because of the terrible things he did. But I would say that, I've never forgotten that Karl Rove said that there would have been no election of President Barack Obama without the Cosby Show. And so that has always been a real example for me in terms of some of the work I want to do, because it means you don't always have to highlight socio-political issues to make a political difference through your art.
Yes.
Sometimes you can just tell stories about people and allow others to see their humanity, and that makes a difference. And so
that's actually probably a more effective way, honestly, because I think that, people have to be in the mood for a polemic or a history lesson, or something that feels like, oh, this is going to educate me, right? Where I believe in like the stealth approach. You sneak in some entertainment, and with that, with that, you sneak in a little bit of a little messaging, a little.
How'd that happen? I learned something. I didn't mean to learn something today. How did that happen?
You plan on that. Look how that happened. The stealth, all about that. So what was it like to mount a production in the middle of the pandemic? And I'm also curious about the discussion that led to running the play as a streamer. I know that very early in the pandemic, we hosted an event sort of on snapshots on the entertainment industry, and we looked at a lot of different industries. And one of the person who spoke on behalf of theater said something very interesting. And again, this is very early in the pandemic, so back last May. He said he thought that the business model for traditional theater was kind of dependent on bussing in the gray hairs, right, from the suburbs. And that if that disappeared, he thought the whole business model for theater might change, which might lead to more exciting and different kinds of production. Which, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but I was very taken by that. And I thought, the problem with theater, and I also began my career in theater at the Schubert Organization, was my first job. But I think that, there's always been a price barrier, right? Yeah. There's always been a sort of a price barrier and a location barrier, right? Because New York was the center, and well, obviously there are good theaters elsewhere, but that was, Broadway in the heart. And then also the prices were so high. So I'm wondering, do you think there's a future in which you have a live performance and also a streamed performance that allows people to have access that might not always be able to for a reduced market price? What do you think about that? Where do you think that this might take us with theater?
Well, I defer to the people who know much more than I do about that, including Marcia Pendleton, who's been working with us on this play. And for those who don't know, Marcia is a bit of a New York legend because she's in the same way that I would call them, what do they call them? Oscar whisperers. Yeah. Oscar campaigns. Marcia really is that, I believe, and I mean this in the utmost compliment, in terms of Black audiences. No one knows more about diverse audiences in the American theater than Marcia Pendleton. And she's been working with us on this show. And her prediction is that it will be a bit of a combination approach. That's where we will be left, to your point, because in addition to the price, the geographic barriers, which have been huge, huge, huge. So speaking for this play, my answer 3 weeks ago, right before we opened, if he'd said, "What does this experience would have been like?" I would have said, "A total nightmare." Right? Working on a TV show full time during the day on the West Coast, while also mounting my first production that was filmed live in a theater, just without an audience. So it was rehearsing, everything was live that was happening that I was supposed to, and I was on Zoom at the same time on the East Coast. Nightmare. Don't recommend it. However, so proud of this production and so proud of the audiences we've been able to bring in. Mm-hmm. And to your point, on Sunday, there was just one group had bought over 40 tickets. Mm. And I was doing a talk back just with that group. Right. Women from all over the country. Right. Women from all over the country. And I thought, this is so extraordinary that people who were not even here were able to watch. We're not even in Baltimore, and I'm in Los Angeles, and we're all getting to have a conversation about this play. Yes, please, more of this, right?
That's what I call the Zoom lemonade, these types of, the COVID lemonades. I'm misquoting my own self here. But yeah, this is what I call the COVID lemonade, is realizing, like, by mounting a play like this, we realize that different impact it can have, that reach can be so much broader, right? I think that's really something we should continue to think about. I think it's exceptional.
I certainly hope so. And I will tell you the other way that the more COVID lemonade, if you will, is in writers' rooms. I've been on different TV shows since COVID started. And I got to tell you, there are people in our writers' rooms who are not in New York and not in LA. Mm-hmm. That's not happening if someone's got to move cross country to go sit physically in a space. Right. It's diversifying writers' rooms in terms of class. And that is super important. And I don't want
just in terms of perspective, because, Hollywood can become a thought bubble, with repetition, and having people who are living in a different geographic place, having different experiences. I really think it helps the diversity in all senses, right? Within the room. So you work across multiple platforms and media, as we've well established. You true Gallatin.
Very tired.
So I want to know, how do you spin all those plates? And
badly.
What did it say?
Badly.
Is there a type of project that you like the most? It sounds to me like theater might be your passionate love. Is that true? Or do you love all your projects equally, like any good creator? How do you feel?
Like any good parent, I tell them I do. Because how can you finish them if you're not saying, I love you, I
I
love you?
love you so much.
Um, uh, Theater, I would say, is the thing I'm most passionate about. As my manager says, it's the thing you did when you were a kid, right? So it's the dream. But I will tell you, I really do believe that the Marie Wilson Wilma Mankiller quote, those are the words I live by. So I will tell you that as an example, I was guest hosting Left, Right, and Center for the NPR affiliate in LA the week that Mr. Floyd was killed, that George Floyd was killed. And this actually was not some divine plan, but I was guest hosting, and every guest we interviewed that week for that show was Black. And the conversation we had, people from different backgrounds, different political persuasions, different ages, that we had about race, the emails I got from people were so extraordinary about what they learned in that conversation, that I felt like, okay, this is right where I need to be this week. Like this was a different form of storytelling. And so that's why I really do have this, you got to meet people where they are. There were people who needed to hear that conversation between all of us. And so I was very grateful for that, and very grateful in that moment to have the kind of career where I could go I was working in a writer's room, and I went and guest hosted this show, and they were just two very different ways of telling stories in the world. And I felt both were meaningful, just different.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay, so you're a Texas girl, right?
I am.
Rural Texas. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a suburb of Houston, so Fort Bend County, Missouri City, Sugar Land area, for anyone who knows Texas.
Right.
Still very much eat like a Texan. I had catfish and fried okra this weekend.
Although you talk like a New Yorker, like me, like you're like, I rarely run into people who talk as fast as I do, but I think you're in competition. So where's your spiritual home? Is it New York, LA, Texas? Where do you feel most like yourself?
I've been based in New York so long that I think they say it's over 10 years, and then you can sort of claim it. But I have to tell you, because of COVID, I've spent, most of the last year in LA. So I really, have become fully bicoastal. I've been doing really the bicoastal thing a few months here, a few months there. And then, COVID happened.
I think that's the way to go, bicoastal. I mean, both cities are great. So, yeah. Where do you think that, I mean, you talked a little bit about this before, about coming to New York and realizing that, as a Texas Republican, Texas Democrat, you were almost a Republican, which made me laugh because my parents were also political. My father was involved in New York City politics when I was growing up. And, but I wondered, what else did you find about really shaped you about that Texas perspective on the world, and what do you think that brings to your work, that growing up in Texas?
I think it's the biggest gift ever, because I grew up in Texas, and I would say I was the first generation in my family that was solidly middle class. My father grew up on a farm in rural Oklahoma. My mother grew up chopping cotton as a small child in rural Oklahoma. Her whole family, they picked cotton in the hot sun for many years. And so having people with that kind of perspective, I think, is invaluable. And frankly, I would argue that was more important when I was working as a political columnist than me moving to Washington, which I never did. And I actually think it served me well, because I am someone who's not only having conversations with people in New York and LA, and I know a lot of us get sensitive on the coast about people from other places saying we're not real America or what have you, and that's obviously not true. We are real Americans, but it becomes very easy to sort of live in a bubble where you're only discussing issues with people who think like you,
right,
or who live like you. And one of the things that I think really helped me as a political columnist was the fact that I still have the same best friend from high school who lives in Texas and is right now primarily a stay-at-home mom. My mother still lives in Texas. One of the big examples I give of this, of the downside of only socializing with people in New York and LA, or your bubbles, your cliques in DC, is it's part of why no one thought Joe Biden would win the nomination, right? Because that became the consensus of the chattering classes in the newsrooms, particularly in New York and DC. And a lot of the newsrooms skew younger, they skew whiter, and they skew Ivy, or, similar to Ivy's like NYU. And meanwhile, I was talking to my mother, and my mother and her friends and her peers were immovable in their support. And I thought, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in South Carolina, because
Mhm.
there's a lot of people like my mom in South Carolina, and we saw what happened in South Carolina. So that's why I actually believe it's been the greatest gift, to have grown up there and to also have those relationships, but to also have had my life very much changed by the people I've befriended in New York and LA, who are different from the people in Texas. So I feel like I have kind of a bicultural approach to coverage, including my documentary Reversing Roe. I mean, that's where it came from. I don't vilify people who don't see eye to eye with me on reproductive rights. I want to hear them and I want to learn. And that was where that film came from, is that perspective of let's talk, because you sound like someone I grew up with, so let's have a conversation.
Yeah, I've always believed that, if you can find one thing to agree on, and then you can find other things to agree on, right? But the problem is that that one thing, we get polarized off one thing that we know we don't agree on, and we stop the conversation.
Especially now. I mean, the column I threatened to write for years and it got away from me. As I said to my editors, there would have been a great column titled "How Twitter Would Have Killed the Civil Rights Act."
Mm.
Because I think of like all of the secret conversations that people like Martin Luther King were having with President Johnson,
Mhm.
and today someone would have been like, here's the purity test for Martin Luther King. He's not allowed to speak to President Johnson until President Johnson says this in
Yeah,
public, right?
yeah, yeah,
And you
yeah,
can't
yeah,
move forward that way. So
yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And also, we should abolish purity tests as well as cancellation culture. There, we got a lot of work to do, all of us, but with good intentions, we'll get there. I believe that. So, on a lighter note, what have been your delights of the pandemic? And since you're in LA, have you discovered any new favorite restaurants besides any favorite things to watch, listen, read? What's been keeping you entertained during the pandemic?
oh, that's a great question. Well, I would tell you, it's been a very strange year because I have so much empathy, and compassion for people who've had such a tough time. Um, for those of us who are a little bit, as much as I talk, it's hard for people to believe this, but I am actually fairly introverted in my private life. I really love the quiet of reading, and having the freedom and the time to do that. And normally I have a life that's so on the go in terms of travel and moving from one coast to the next. I actually don't get as much quiet time to just write and
Mhm.
think as I would like. So in a weird way, I think my reps would say this has been they've in some ways been relieved that, oh God, she's home and she's writing. She's not out at an event. She's not doing an interview. She's just home writing, and what a blessing that
Are they
is.
going to come after us for this, or are they going to say we took you
Possibly.
away and hunt us
No
down?
secret. Shh. Yeah.
We'll
So
see
no,
what-
I've gotten so much writing done. I really have. I've gotten a lot of writing done, which has been a gift. I've been, watching reruns of favorites like The Golden Girls, because that always makes me smile. And I also think, especially now as a writer myself and writing on the Sex and the City reboot, I do consider Golden Girls one of the greatest shows. I mean, it's timeless. It holds up the way it dealt with sexuality. So revisiting shows like that. And I'm reading a book right now called Trio, which I think is fairly fabulous. And it's call it I guess it's a biography written by Aram Saroyan about his mother,
Hmm.
Carol Saroyan, Mathau, Gloria Vanderbilt, Una O'Neill, who were all best friends from high school, and it's about their journeys as these sort of extraordinary
Oh,
women at a time where it was tough to be an extraordinary woman.
I'm going
And
to have to write that down. Check that out. That
it's a great,
sounds really
it's a great
good. All right, thank you. That was a pro tip. I'm excited.
book.
Something good to read. So you've succeeded in so many areas. Is there something that you have your eyes set on that you haven't, taken on yet? I mean, astronaut, rocket scientist, what physicist, what else are you gonna do?
I just really want a dog.
I think that is an achievable aspiration for a woman of your talents. I do.
Grown up at my mother's, it's the one thing my mother said I'm not allowed to do because of laugh. I had a dog growing up that was left with her when I went off to NYU.
Mm.
And my sister did the same thing when she went off to Rice, and my niece did the same thing when she went off to college. So my mother said, I see how this movie ends, which is you getting a dog during the pandemic and me taking care of the dog once you start traveling around the world for projects again.
Mom just said no, not,
She's
you
like,
need a little dog that you can take with you and like a little
yeah, I
cat.
love how you're thinking. But yeah, I actually do have a couple of projects in the pipeline, including some narrative podcasts I'm incredibly passionate about, because that's a really growing space.
Yes.
And I will tell you that, I think you probably deduced this. I care deeply about social justice and civil rights. And what I'm finding is you can kind of tell stories that are less commercial in the narrative podcast space, because there's a little bit less money.
Right. Economic pressure on it. Yeah.
People will take risks. So I have a couple of stories that are set in the past that have to do with race that I'm super excited about. And I have another documentary cooking that I'm not allowed to talk about, but God, I'm so excited about it.
You'll tell us first when you can talk about it, right? So we can come out and support. Okay. That's all I ask. Okay.
Sure.
So I want to just remind our audience that we have a few minutes left, and if people want to put any questions into the chat, they can do that, or into the Q&A, and I will relay them to Keli. What advice would you have? I mean, I think what you said at the beginning, which is very true, is that there's not always one path, and no one's path is the same. But for someone who is listening and aspiring to be, Keli Goff, what do you suggest they do? What advice would you give them to take into the world as they plot their next steps?
Well, I guess the most important piece of advice is to focus on the work, because I meet so many people, and we touched upon this a little bit, right? About people we try to help, like with introductions or that sort of thing, or feedback on a script. And so many people, I think, because of the whole social media culture, are focused on branding first, work second, or work. And I have found that nothing takes the place of a great script. Nothing takes the place of a great script. And I will be honest, now that I'm in a position where I can help people, if someone says to me, oh, I don't have a script, but here's the idea, and I Google you, and you have like 25,000 tweets, or you posted a lot of TikToks, but you don't have a great script, that tells me where your priorities are. And it never ceases to amaze me how many people are like that, where they're like, I've got a great Instagram, I've got a this, but I don't have a great script. That is where it's all got to start, is you've got to focus on the work and focus on the writing. So that's my piece of advice. And also, I would say that when it comes to social media, I have not hired for my own show, but I know plenty of people who have. And, people look at that stuff. So what can seem like a pithy joke to you in 2020, when you're interviewing for a job on a TV show, 2021, and you made a pithy joke about a TV show you didn't like, and it happened to be one that the showrunner worked on, probably not getting the job, right? So was it worth it to do that pithy tweet when it's going to be around forever? So things like that, I just encourage people to really think about.
We have a related question from the audience. This is from Lizette Terry Gallatin, 2020. And she says, how do you know when you've reached a place where your script is ready to be pitched? Which, is a really tough question, I think, to answer. I don't know if you have an answer to that. That's a good question, but a hard one.
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. Yeah, because I have scripts that I'm like, still need some work. I have a play that's on stage right now, and I'm like, oh, these are the 12 things I plan to change as soon as the play. So here's what I would say is find people you trust to give you honest feedback and help them guide you, and then listen to your gut. So what I mean by that is you don't need a famous person to read your script. You need someone you trust. So for instance, one of the people who I have read my scripts when I have any questions about, is it ready, is my friend Kevin Artigue, who was in the emerging writers group at the Public Theater with me. He's not a showrunner, but he's a great writer, and he gets my voice. And so when Kevin says, what were you trying to say with this scene? And I go, well, I'm trying to say this. He's like, okay, I didn't get that. So you might want to go back to that scene. But if you fix that scene, I think you're golden. I believe it when he says it, right? So you need to find those people, and it could just be a friend who's also trying to make it as a writer. Yeah. I didn't do this, but I know other people, or actually I did this briefly. I did it for a few months, is a writer's group, where you hold each other accountable. That works for a lot of people too. So I would just find your people. That's what it is about this business. Find your people that you trust, and then, go to them.
Yeah. And I would just say that I agree with you. I don't think any writer gets to a point where they say this is done. Someone says that's all the time you have. Same with editing. You'd never stop editing unless someone says, that's it, we're shutting the editing room down, right? No more time, no more money for you, right? So it's we have another question from Maureen Zufak. She's Steinhardt class of 2023. She says, oftentimes things like book writing, journalism, theater, etc., are seen as existing in separate spheres. How does one navigate being a jack of all writing trades? Essentially, she's asking, how do I become you? So only you can answer that. So I turn that over.
I wish I had a good answer. I'm going to give a shout out to someone who doesn't get enough credit. My assistant, Ashley, is fabulous and she keeps me on track. And I actually genuinely don't believe I would have gone through the last couple months of working on a TV show full time and a play, almost full time without her help. Because she really does keep me with in terms of scheduling. And that's something I struggle with. And by the way, it's part of how I ended up at Gallatin, right? Those of us who are not sort of traditional 9-to-5 personalities look for opportunities to kind of be like, I'll do this at noon, I'll do this at 5, I'll do this at 2 a.m., But the other thing I would say is you got to start with doing one thing well, right? Because then people will trust you. And so what I found is the person who said to me 6 years ago, you got some talent, Kelly, but you just do too many things. Once I actually completed the documentary film I was working on and it did well and it made, it had an impact, it's hard to say I was just kind of being a dilettante, right? I focused on that and I did that well, but that also meant that there were things I had to turn down while working on that film. And for the record, I just want to be very clear. I don't recommend doing what I've done the last couple of months of trying to do both. I got through it, but I do wonder what it would have been like to just do this play. But I'm also having such an amazing time on this show that I had to make it work. But I would say if you can just really focus on doing one really great thing well at a time, that's important. And the last thing I'd say about that is you can also, while you're working on one thing, be developing another. That I think is also a big part of our business, is being nimble enough to say, I'm on a great TV series. It might not last forever. Most don't. Let me work on a script or a thing for after this,
Right. I think that's always good advice. I think everyone should always have multiple things going on, just particularly in just to keep a lively mind, but also in this business, putting your faith in one thing happening or one thing continuing is, a fool's game.
By the way, can I just say too, I would also add though, specifically for women and people of color, it empowers you. One of the things I've learned, especially in Hollywood, is there are a lot of people who I see who someone gets, when people feel like they know you feel like you don't have other options, it's easier for them to not treat you with the respect and dignity you deserve, right?
That's interesting.
If someone feels like, oh, I know that they're just a full-time TV writer and they don't have another job lined up, I don't have to pay them what they say they're worth. Whereas I have had this happen where I have said to my reps before, that's okay, I don't need it. I'd rather go work on my documentary. And if they want to come back with a better offer, they'll give us a call, and that's something I'm happy to have that as part of,
Yeah. I have a question from, well, I totally agree with that. The idea of being able to walk away. I've learned this early on in negotiations. That is the only true power in a negotiation, is being really able to say,
right,
walk away from this deal. So Nora, who is one of our favorite alums, says, thanks for the discussion. Ray, the playwriting, what was your process like? Did you workshop the piece with actors, write alone, etc.? And Nora, I should add, who I know a little bit, is also a wonderful writer.
Oh, Nora, that is such a great question. And I'm so happy you asked it. I'm almost wondering if one of my friends planted you to ask that question. Because as a playwright, especially after the program at the Public, I had a few readings and, they didn't get produced, right? And then I wrote this play, finished the first draft a year ago, and here we are a year later with the production. And during this process, there were moments where I said to myself, now I understand why they do all the readings. Because there were moments where I thought, I really wish I had more time, right? Like if I had more time, I would experiment, I would change this, I would change that. And we just didn't have the luxury of that time. So the answer to your question is, it literally was a year from me completing a first draft to a production, which I know almost never happens. And what a gift that's been to me. But I also just want to say to every person listening who's been like, I can't get something produced, I'm in production and workshop hell, that time is often a luxury. And so enjoy it when you have it. So that's the answer to that question.
Okay. We have another question. This is from Danielle. from Gallatin. She's saying, this conversation has been so inspiring, so that's good to
Oh,
hear.
thank you.
I'd love to know what advice you might share for the class of 2021, the most recent alums joining the Gallatin network. How can they spin the COVID graduation feeling, that's so sad, into a more empowering opportunity? I think that's a lovely question. I think, I mean, I've been saying to a lot of students, everyone has a story about what this year was for
Yeah.
them. And you have to make that part of your narrative the same way any other experience that you've had becomes part of your narrative. But what advice would you give to the new
I love this question too. And what I would say is I'm now older. I'm so much older than all of you now at this point that now I can say this with confidence in a way I could not have 10 years ago, which is turn anything that you see as your liability into your superpower. And what I mean by that is, especially when I was graduating and I was trying to make it in media, and then later I was trying to make it in Hollywood, to be blunt, I'm not someone who grew up in privilege. And so more privilege than my parents did, but I'm certainly not from wealth. I went to NYU on financial aid and scholarships. And when I was trying to make it in media in New York, I remember that feeling when I would see people whose parents had bought them apartments, who literally they could take a media job or not. It didn't affect if they could pay their rent. And I was struggling so much. And that was a really tough feeling. And I thought, maybe, is this journey really for me? Like, can I make it? And now all these years later, I realize that that has become my superpower because I know what I can endure. And it's very interesting because I know some people who grew up in extreme privilege who also have that, right? That sort of what I call the hustler instinct that's so necessary in really competitive professions. But I also know people who don't have it, right? Because they didn't have to really endure as much as people like me did when they were coming up. So when they come across an obstacle in their career, they really don't know how to deal with it. Whereas for me, I channel Kamala Harris. I eat no's for breakfast. My response when a studio exec says no is, oh, too bad for them. They're going to miss out, right? Let me go to their competitor next door and I'll pitch them because someone's going to be smart enough to buy my idea. And so I encourage all of you who've had a tough year is to look for what that has gifted you in terms of your superpower. Has it made you more tenacious? Has it made you more resilient? And that's what the story you should be telling in interviews is, oh, I had a really tough year, had to move home with my parents, but I helped them with this. I helped them with that. And this is what it reminded me. And that's why I'm sitting here interviewing for this job right now.
That is I think, a very inspiring place to end. I feel like that was a very uplifting piece of advice, and really a pleasure talking with you. I think it's been really exciting to hear about all the different things you're working on, and very excited to see what you do with the SATC reboot. That'll be fascinating. And
everyone will check out Glorious World of Crowns, Kinks, and
yes,
Curls.
please, everyone. Again, the Glorious World of Crowns, Kinks, and Curls at the Baltimore Center Stage. You can Google it, buy virtual tickets. I can tell you, as I said before, just even by the synopsis, I got a little teary. So it's on my plans for the weekend, and I hope you'll make it yours as well.
This was so fun. I loved Gallatin, and it's meant so much in my life. So this has been such a pleasure. And I'm sorry it was a few minutes late.
No worries. And I will tell you that Gallatin loves you, because when I went to Gallatin, I said, we'd like to feature a Gallatin alum for this spotlight series that we've started. You were the first name that came up.
Oh,
so
sweet. Thank you.
The love is mutual. And thank you again for your time and all your wisdom, Keli. It was really a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. I really admire your career too. So this was really, I love the House of Sand and Fog. So this was really an honor.
Well, thank you. I will tell you that I say that I will ruthlessly exploit anyone who's willing to help the program. So you'll probably be hearing from me again. Don't think you're off the hook.
Sounds good. Looking forward to that.
Okay. Really pressured. I see we have a lot of thanks so much. This was amazing from our attendees, and lots of great advice. So once again, you're a hit.
Okay.
Keep that up every forum you go into. So here you are again.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you soon at our next discovery session, and we will just watch Keli's career continue to skyrocket.
Thank you.
All right. Bye everyone. Thank you.